Let's just tell the truth. We like to say kindness is a virtue, a strength, a soft power that changes the world, and I believe that with my whole heart. But if you've ever tried to consistently lead with kindness in your relationships, your workplace, your family, you've probably noticed something strange. Let's be clear about something right away. Kindness is not weakness. Kindness is not about being a doormat or pretending everything is fine when it's not. Kindness is not smiling through pain, agreeing to avoid conflict, or letting people get away with bad behavior just to keep the peace. Kindness is choosing to stay human when it would be so much easier to disconnect. In fact, one of the most courageous things you can do in this world is to stay kind on purpose, not because you're trying to be liked, not because you're afraid to fight, but because you believe in connection more than control. That takes real strength, and it takes vulnerability. Think about the last time you offered someone kindness in a hard moment. Maybe it was forgiveness. Maybe it was empathy when they didn't deserve it. Maybe it was just refusing to lash out when every part of you wanted to. You probably felt exposed because kindness asks you to open your heart without any guarantee of how it will be received. You're saying, here's my softness. You might not understand it. You might judge it. You might walk all over it. But I'm offering it anyway because this is who I am. That's terrifying. And that's vulnerability. See, vulnerability isn't just about standing on a stage and sharing your story. Vulnerability shows up in 1,000 small acts of kindness. Checking in on someone who's been cold to you, saying, I'm sorry first, even when your pride is screaming, giving someone the benefit of the doubt instead of dragging their name through the mud. Saying I love you and meaning it without needing them to say it back. Every single one of those things has risk baked in. Risk of rejection, risk of being misunderstood, risk of being seen as weak or too emotional or too much. And yet we do it. We choose kindness anyway, because even though it costs us something in the short term, it offers something greater in the long term: authenticity, trust, and the quiet confidence that we stayed true to ourselves. But here's the hard part. When you lead with kindness, especially when others are leading with cynicism, sarcasm, or cruelty, you become a mirror. People start to see what they've turned off in themselves. And instead of feeling inspired, they sometimes feel attacked by your softness, because your vulnerability, your choice to stay open, shows them how tightly they've closed. So yes, people might mock it. They might question your motives. They might hate the way your kindness makes them feel. But that's not a reflection of your weakness. It's a reflection of their discomfort with their own tenderness. And still, you show up. Still, you stay kind. Still, you choose vulnerability over armor, because you know that true strength isn't loud or sharp or dominant. True strength is kind. True strength is vulnerable. True strength is knowing you could go hard and choosing not to. Not because you're afraid, but because you're brave enough not to need to. Kindness doesn't just make people uncomfortable sometimes, it makes them defensive. Why? Because kindness is disruptive. We tend to think of kindness as soft, passive, quiet. But real kindness, conscious, consistent, values-driven kindness, is anything but passive. It's subversive, it rattles cages, and most of all, it threatens control. In many environments, whether it's a workplace, a school, a political system, or even a family, There are invisible power structures that keep things running. Who's in charge? Who gets to speak? Who gets to matter? And often those structures are built on hierarchy, fear, competition, and silence. And then kindness walks in, and it doesn't play by those rules. Kindness says, you don't need to dominate to be heard. We can disagree without dehumanizing. You matter even if you're not the loudest voice in the room. As expands, because when kindness is consistent, it starts reshaping the environment. It makes space for honesty, empathy, nuance, and trust. And to people who are used to operating through fear or manipulation, that feels like losing control. Let me give you an example. Let's say you work in a culture where performance is everything. People are constantly competing, mistakes are punished, vulnerability is seen as a liability. Now imagine you're the person who shows up and says, let's give each other some grace. It's okay to admit we're overwhelmed. How can I support you? At first, people won't know what to do with you. Some might appreciate it, but others, they'll say you're soft, that you're not tough enough for leadership, that you don't get it. Why? Because you're not playing by the unspoken rules, you're not buying into the belief that power means pressure or that respect is earned through intimidation. You're introducing a new kind of power, relational power. And that scares people who depend on fear to keep control. This happens in personal relationships too. In a household where one person always dominates, always decides, always deflects emotion, kindness can feel like rebellion. Because when you stop participating in blame or defensiveness, when you respond to cruelty with calmness, you're not keeping the peace, you're disrupting the system. You're silently saying, I won't play this game, I won't escalate, but I also won't collapse. And that throws people off. They're used to cycles of conflict. They're used to reaction and retaliation, and your kindness, your steady refusal to play by those patterns, it forces change or it exposes resistance. Let's be honest, kindness is political, not in the red-blue sense, but in the power sense. Because when you consistently treat people with dignity, especially those who've been ignored, devalued, or silenced, you start shifting the ground under the old structures. You say, you don't need to earn basic human respect. You're not disposable. We all belong. And that undoes the kind of power that's built on separation, status, and scarcity. So yes, when you lead with kindness, some people will see you as weak, but others will see you as dangerous. Because kindness is radical. Kindness is courageous. Kindness is revolutionary. And in a world that's gotten used to power being loud, sharp, and self-protective, your kindness may just be the most powerful challenge of all. Sometimes the reason people don't like your kindness has nothing to do with you, it has everything to do with them. Because real, grounded, compassionate kindness, it doesn't just comfort people, sometimes it exposes them. Let me explain. When you show up with kindness, especially in a world that feels rushed, cynical, and competitive, it can be disarming. Your presence feels different. Your tone, your pace, your care, they carry a kind of quiet power. But here's the paradox. That warmth can feel like a threat, especially to someone who's spent a lifetime covering up their own insecurities. Because your kindness does something subtle but powerful. It reflects them back to themselves. Think about it. And when you walk into a room and offer someone sincere attention, when you see them, really see them, they have two choices. Receive that kindness and feel deeply seen, supported, and valued, or shrink from it. Get suspicious of it, push it away because it touches something too tender. Why would someone reject something so good? Because kindness highlights what someone believes they are lacking. It says, you're worthy of care. And if deep down someone doesn't believe that's true for them, your kindness feels like a spotlight on their self-doubt. Here's how it often shows up. You offer encouragement and they roll their eyes or make a sarcastic comment. You show compassion and they say, don't pity me. You listen generously and they accuse you of being fake or manipulative. You forgive and they say, you're just trying to feel better than me. It's painful when that happens, especially if you're not performing kindness, but really trying to live from it. But again, it's not about you. It's about the way your kindness interrupts their inner narrative. Most people have built armor around their insecurity. They protect themselves with detachment, humor, perfectionism, aggression, or even apathy. So when someone comes along and offers warmth instead of ego, presence instead of performance, it messes with their system. You're not playing the game they've come to expect. You're not matching their tension with more tension. You're being kind without needing anything back. And that's confusing. It makes them wonder, why are they doing this? What's their angle? What do they want? Because when insecurity runs the show, genuine kindness feels suspicious. It's also important to say, sometimes people aren't rejecting your kindness, they're just not ready to receive it. They've been let down, manipulated, or hurt so many times that they associate kindness with danger. They've learned that being seen often leads to being judged. So when you show up as safe, calm, non-judgmental, it doesn't feel safe to them at all. It feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliar can feel terrifying. So again, it's not about you. But here's the real takeaway. You are not responsible for someone else's comfort with their own vulnerability. You don't need to shrink your kindness just because it makes someone uneasy. You don't need to dim your compassion because someone misreads it as weakness. And you certainly don't need to trade your empathy for armor just because someone else is still hiding. Kindness isn't about proving anything. It's not about fixing people or forcing connection. It's about standing in your values, even when those values highlight where others are still hurting. And maybe the most beautiful part, sometimes, not always, but sometimes your steady, patient kindness plants a seed, not for instant change, but for the day when that person is finally ready to believe they're worthy of love too. And when they look back, they might remember, there was someone who saw me even when I couldn't see myself. That's the quiet power of kindness. It doesn't demand, it doesn't shame, it just offers. And for someone drowning in insecurity, that offer can feel like a lifeline or a mirror. Either way, it's sacred work. You can be kind, consistent, calm, and clear, and people will still call you weak. They'll assume you're naive. They'll assume you can be pushed. They'll assume you don't know how the real world works. And it hurts. It hurts to have something you value, something you intentionally practice, misunderstood, dismissed, or twisted into a character flaw. But we have to talk about why this happens, because it doesn't say much about you. It says a lot about what we as a culture have come to believe about power. We've been taught directly and indirectly that strength looks like dominance, that leadership looks like certainty, that if you want to be respected, you better be loud, fast, sharp, and maybe even a little intimidating. So when you show up with softness, with thoughtfulness, with patience, people don't always know what to do with that. You don't fit the blueprint they've been handed. And instead of questioning the blueprint, they question you. Here's the thing though, kindness isn't the absence of strength. It's the presence of restraint. It's knowing you could lash out and choosing not to. It's knowing you could bulldoze your way through a conversation, a decision, a conflict, and choosing instead to pause, to listen, to regulate, to stay human. That's not weakness. That's mastery. Let's be real. It's easier to be reactive than reflective. It's easier to be defensive than honest. It's easier to raise your voice than raise your self-awareness. But kindness demands something deeper. The ability to stay in control of yourself, even when you can't control what's happening around you. That's not a lack of power. That's power with roots. But here's where it gets tricky. If you're kind, especially if you're consistently kind, people will test you. They'll push your boundaries. They'll mistake your openness for availability, your grace for permission, your silence for agreement. And when you finally say no, when you draw a boundary or assert a truth, they might act surprised or even offended because they assumed your kindness meant you'd bend forever. That's not your failure. That's their misunderstanding. Here's what they didn't realize. You weren't being kind because you had no choice. You were being kind because you had a choice and you were rooted enough in your values to make it. You weren't avoiding conflict. You were honoring dignity, yours and theirs. You weren't being agreeable. You were being intentional. Big difference. So what do? We stay kind, but we also stay clear. Because when kindness is paired with clarity, when people know where your line is, even as you lead with heart, you stop being seen as soft and start being seen as solid. Kindness without boundaries gets exploited. But kindness with backbone, that changes rooms. It shifts culture. It rewrites what leadership can look like. It invites others to lay down their armor and show up whole. And let's not forget, people who call kindness weak often do it to avoid their own emotional labor. It's easier to mock tenderness than confront your own fear of being vulnerable. It's easier to dismiss someone as too nice than admit you're uncomfortable with your own capacity for cruelty. But that's not your burden to carry. You don't have to convince people that your kindness is strength. You just have to keep living like it is. Because over time, your example will say what your words never could. This is what strength looks like: steady, grounded, human. Kindness is not just about how you treat others, it's about how you ask others to show up. And here's what most people miss. Real kindness, the kind rooted in values and integrity, doesn't just comfort people, it challenges them. Why? Because kindness holds up a mirror. It quietly but firmly says, I'm willing to meet you with compassion, but I'm not going to lie for you. I'm not going to excuse behavior that's hurtful, and I'm not going to carry the weight of your choices so you can stay comfortable. That's not cruelty. That's accountability. And for a lot of people, especially those used to getting a free pass through charm, power, or fear, that is where your kindness becomes deeply inconvenient. There's a myth that kindness is all about being nice, about making people feel good, about keeping the peace and smoothing things over. But let's be honest, niceness avoids tension. Kindness walks straight into it with love and honesty and respect. Kindness says, I care about you too much to let you keep hiding behind your defenses. I care about our relationship too much to pretend I'm not hurt. I respect you enough to tell you the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. That's real kindness. And that kind of kindness, it demands something in return. It asks people to grow, to reflect, to own what they've said or done, and to show up differently. But here's where it gets hard. People often expect kindness to mean permissiveness. They think if you're kind, you'll overlook things, let things slide, keep quiet, smile through it. So when you say, that crossed a line, I'm not available for this dynamic anymore. All right, that apology isn't enough unless it's followed by change. They don't know what to do with you because you're not being cruel. You're not yelling. You're not retaliating. You're just clear, calm, steady. And that makes it harder for them to dodge what they've done. You've taken away their favorite excuse. You're overreacting. You've removed the drama they can hide behind. You're not escalating. You're holding a line. And now they have to face something they've maybe spent years avoiding, their own accountability. It's worth saying again, kindness without boundaries is just enabling. But kindness with clarity, that's transformative. When someone knows that your kindness is not a shield for their behavior, it forces them to choose. Do I step up and grow, or do I double down on blame? And that is where your kindness becomes a filter. Not everyone will rise to meet it. Some will walk away. Some will lash out. Some will accuse you of being too sensitive, too much, not the same anymore. But the ones who stay, the ones who take a breath and say, you're right, I didn't handle that well, let me try again, those are the ones worth building with. Because real kindness doesn't just create comfort, it creates conditions for growth. And growth is not always gentle. Sometimes it looks like saying no when silence would be easier, having the hard conversation, aiming the thing everyone else is avoiding, holding someone's humanity without excusing their harm. It's not about shaming people. It's about respecting them enough to believe they can do better and expecting them to try. So yes, kindness may cost you some approval, some friendships, some illusions of peace. But what it gives you, a life of integrity, relationships rooted in truth, and the deep, quiet knowing that you didn't abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. And it's the kind of leadership this world is starving for. Kindness is not always good, because kindness without boundaries can become a gateway to harm. Not always intentional harm, but harm nonetheless. This is where so many of us get stuck. We have been taught that kindness means selflessness, that kindness means being liked, that kindness means never upsetting anyone,